Tonight we're doing something a little bit different. Bob, for those of you here this morning, know that he was down in his back. He went to the emergency room. He's home now. They gave him, Craig was a steroid injection and some other medication. And sounds like it's a sciatica issue. So I'm not sure what sermon ready to present to y'all. But I watched this video, Larry and Sandy Glore. This is a video that they have. And I tell you what, it was just so powerful and so impactful. I was like, man, I've got to show this to the church. What it is, it's a recording from the mid-'80s from High Street. So the video quality is not that great. But it was recorded at High Street Baptist in Springfield. Lieutenant Pete Collins of the Mississippi Highway Patrol spoke there. I just got off the phone a little bit ago with Pastor Eddie Lyons from High Street, and just made sure that we had permission to show that. And he said yes. He said absolutely. Please do show it. And so it's going to be on our live stream as well. So those of you that are joining us on Facebook, we hope you enjoy this. But it's very powerful. It's going to be a little bit long. We're not going to get out of here in 45 minutes. It's going to be probably about 50 minutes long, but I promise you, you're going to enjoy this. You may want to move as close to the middle as you can to see the screen clearly, but I know it's going to be a blessing to you guys. But on the roads, keep them in your prayers, as well as Pastor Bob. Dear Lord, we love you and thank you so much for your grace and your mercy and love, God. It really is amazing that you look down from heaven on us and that you care about us finite, frail individuals who fail you constantly. God, I don't know why you love me, but I'm so glad that you do. And I thank you for the opportunity to gather together as a body of believers and to worship you and to hear from Lord, to really focus on how we need to be, Lord, with our love, with our relationships, how you want us to live our lives in this present life, God. And I pray that you receive all the glory and honor and praise for everything that's said and done tonight. For it's in your precious name we ask these things. Amen. All right, Emily's going to get the lights for us, and I'm going to get our projector turned on here, and we'll get started here in just a moment. It's going to take that bulb just a moment to warm up.
Pete Collins is a lieutenant in the Mississippi Highway Patrol. He was voted the most outstanding trooper in the state of Mississippi last year. Certainly a wonderful Christian testimony, and we proudly present once again today the ministry and the preaching of Lieutenant Pete Collins.
I'm flattered that you would allow me to come and have part of your evening. I will confess to you, I am not a preacher. I'm a state trooper. To invite someone to preach in your pulpit that you're here tonight, folks. Now you're talking about a con artist. Now somebody must have conned you, because you see, folks, I never laid eyes on this guy before. The real Pete Collins couldn't make it, and so I took his place. Thank you for letting me come. I bring you greetings from the state of Mississippi. The Commissioner of Public Safety, Ms. Louisa Dixon. Ladies, we have the only female Commissioner of Public Safety in America. And I'll share this to you, that she's the best thing that ever hit the Mississippi Highway Patrol. You know, men of all time, we've got this real macho attitude, but she has such tremendous integrity. and she asked that I might share. Have you ever, ladies and gentlemen, felt so overwhelmed that you simply did not know what to say? I read something many years ago, and I wanted to keep it, and I stuck it in my Bible, and if you could see closely, you would see that the pages are now worn and yellowed. But it's something I'd like to begin tonight's program with. It's entitled Saints and Sinners. Now, I want you to know I don't need these. They're only for looks. It says, when some folks yield to temptation and breaks a conventional law, we look for no good in his makeup. Oh God, how we look for the flaw. No one will ask how tempted, nor comes food for the jackal for those who's never been caught. He sinned, we shout from the housetops. We forget all the good that he's done. We center on one lost battle, and we forget all the times that he won. Come gaze at the sinner, we thunder, and by his example be taught that his footsteps will lead you to destruction, says all of those who've never been caught. I'm a sinner, O Lord, and I know it. I'm weak, I blunder, and I fail. I'm tossed on life's stormy ocean like a ship embroiled in a gale. But I'm willing to trust thy mercy and to keep the commandments that you've taught. But God, if you really love me. Now, I'm not saying anything. All I'm saying is, if your phone's ringing, answer it. Apparently, you folks in Missouri know what I'm talking about. All of you know anything about, if you know anything about sports, you know Jerry Rice, one of the greatest hands in football, is from Mississippi, a little small place called Crawford, and he went to college in a little small Delta school called Mississippi Valley State, and they call themselves the Delta Demons. And their mascot, honestly, is a little fella dressed up in a devil's outfit, and he travels up and down the sidelines as their mascot. And part of their initiation ceremony last year, they took this little young pledge and they put him in this devil's outfit, and they carried him all the way up to Miller City, way out in the Delta, and they just a little old country dirt road, and it commenced to rain. Now, you folks up here don't know what commence means, but it meant it started to rain. And he figured he better not get this devil's suit wet, he'd get in trouble, so he spotted this little old light up there, and he started to it, and they was having a revival meeting. Now, don't get ahead of me, please. And that preacher had a moving. I mean, he was shelling that hellfire and brimstone, and as the old country folks used to say, he was moving them people. And the little fella didn't know he was just trying to get out of the rain, and he just walked in the back door. And they started running and hollering and going out windows, which was a pretty good feat, being the windows were not open. And this rather large lady, she tried to go out the same door this little boy did, and they hung up right face to face. And she looked at him and said, "Mr. Devil, I've heard a lot about you, but this is the first time I ever had a chance to meet you personally. But I want you to know I've been on your side all the time. Of you that have, out of courtesy, you laugh." Folks, I'm awed because I'm just a trooper. What I am going to share with you.
This is
someone
an
else
expected,
say.
so it's going to clear up here in just a moment.
Not what I had the opportunity to watch happen on television. What I am going to tell you tonight is what I personally know. I'm going to talk with you tonight about the greatest heartache that you'll ever know, that's gripping our country in such a way that I'm afraid that some of us have placed our head in the sand and we don't want to know about it. No, it's not just the cocaine and drug epidemic that you hear so much of. The greatest problem facing our country today is something's happening to our families, folks. See, folks ask me, Trooper, what do you think's wrong with kids? 80% of it's mom and daddies. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not here to ask any of you to marry me. I'll never see you again. In a few moments, I'll walk off of this platform and I'll never see you again. So I'm not here to try to impress you. I'm here, folks, just trying to tell you something. You see, last year I was very honored that I was elected State Trooper of the Year. In a tremendous congregation, when they announced it, I didn't know, but I walked up there and everybody stood and started clapping. Well, I'd worked for 17 years for that honor. I mean, I lived and breathed the Mississippi Highway Patrol. I thought to wear this uniform was the closest to God a man could get on the earth. Long. Folks, he was standing right out there with his mama, and he is standing up there clapping for his daddy. And I looked at him. And ladies and gentlemen, it was just yesterday that he was that long. Oh, I remember when my wife came in and told me we was going to have a little baby. I was making $49 a week at a picture frame factory. I looked at her and I said, we can't afford a baby. She said, well, now's a fine time to tell me. And we was like all kids. Well, you know, I couldn't afford him. I don't want him. See, folks, all my life I'd been raised in fussing and fighting and cussing and knocking all my life. My brothers used to take us kids and hide us underneath the kitchen table when they'd come in drinking and fussing so we wouldn't get in a fight. Now, I remember my brother used to take an old quilt, and it was ragged at the edge, but he'd put it across the table, and he'd call it our teepee, and we'd go and get under that, and he'd hold us while they're fussing and fighting. And he'd say, don't y'all worry, one day we're going to grow up and have us a mansion. And I remember thinking I didn't want a mansion. I wanted a home. And I said, God, I can't love a little old suitcase fixed. And she woke me up one night and said, my back's hurting. I said, Mama, that's the wrong side. She said, you touch that light and I'll break your neck. And fellas, we jumped up and I put her in the car and I took her down to a little old hospital and they put her on a little gurney and down through, and before I knew it, they came back through there with a little old green sheet. I mean, he wasn't big as a minute. I said, I don't want him, lady. Don't you understand? And she kept coming at me, and I kept backing up, and I couldn't go any further. And she just Oh, you know what I'm talking about. She just took the corner of that little green sheet and she pulled it back. And fellas, just one look at him, I knew I was old enough to be a daddy. And I knew I could love him. And they put him in that little old room. There's 4 or 5 little babies, but he knew me. He was waving, see. And I went out in the backyard and looked up at those same stars, and I said, God, if you'll let him grow up, I'll promise you 3 things. Number 1, I won't never leave him. Now, folks, that hadn't been easy to keep. I don't hear anybody saying amen. Number 2, I won't ever do anything, God, intentionally to make him ashamed that I'm his daddy. But listen to me, mamas and daddies. I said, God, if you'll let my boy grow up, he'll never come home and smell alcohol on his daddy's breath. Why? Not because, listen, I'm not here to fuss at you. I'm just here to tell you, I don't drink. Not because I think it's this. Because, folks, you looking at old freckle-faced state trooper raised in it. I don't have to live in it. You see, folks, the Biggie's so different. I stopped this old fella one night. He was driving, gang, an old Chevrolet pickup. The fenders were rattling. And I got him out of the truck, and it wasn't his first trip. He knew just exactly what to do. He got out, and I met him, and he looked at me, and I said, Mr. Ferguson, you drinking again? He said, yeah, boy, I am. I didn't say another word. He just walked over to try the patrol car and sat down, and I got in, and we went to the jail, didn't say a word. We got out, and he walked in and sat down at the intoxilizer. He knew his place. He blew in the machine, and he was intoxicated, and I reached up and took the old jail keys hanging on a big ring, and I walked back through the iron cell doors, and I'd open one door and he'd follow me, and we traveled down to a place it's called the drunk tank. Now, folks, if you're not familiar, it's just a concrete floor. There's not a bed, there's just a commode, and that's it. And I pulled the door back, and he walked in and get in the box, and I walked out, and I started home. I finally keyed the mic and told my station I was home for the night, and I went in, and my wife and I talked, and finally to bed. A couple of troopers, and I pulled in to talk to them, and while I was there, a young man in an old burnt orange 65 Mustang drove in. And fine-looking young fella, had his football leather jacket on, a t-shirt, and a pair of blue jeans. He walked over to me and stuck his hand out, and we talked a moment, and finally he looked down, and he looked up at me, and he said, Mr. Collins, I come to get my daddy. And I said, who's your daddy, son? And when he told me, I realized that it was that old drunk I'd locked up the night before. I said to myself, Lord, I don't want him to see his daddy like this. And then I sort of got in my mind, well, son, big and strong as you are, you came up here to give your daddy just what he needs, and I want to have part of that. I want to watch it. And I took the keys off the wall, and I walked back through the jail, and his son followed me, and I walked to the drunk tank, and I opened it, and ladies and gentlemen, there his dad was on the floor, nasty, filthy. A player walk over and reach down and grab him and shake him. But you know what he did? He walked over there, ladies and gentlemen, and he took his handkerchief out of his pocket. And he wiped that nasty face of that old drunk. And he said, come on, Daddy, Mama's fixing breakfast for you. She sent me to get you. He helped him up, and the old fella spoke to me as he walked out of the door, and the little old boy looked back and said, thank you, Mr. Collins, for taking care of Daddy, not letting him get hurt. But then he said something. Listen to me, church members. he said something that crushed this old state trooper's heart. He said, Mr. Collins, do you see, folks, there's such a line between love of parents and young people. They want to love so much, and they want so much. Folks, I wished I had the power to tell you tonight about a heartache. Because see, every dream I had in the world was standing out there that night clapping his hands. And my wife and I brought him home from the hospital, and I said, God, if you will let him get grown, I'm going to take him fishing, and I'm going to take him hunting, and I'm going to be everything to Jeff Collins that nobody ever was to his daddy. I'm going to spend time with my boy. My wife and I'd go in where he was in his little bassinet, and we'd look and see if he's still breathing. Get grown, boy, I got plans for you. Get grown. And he started walking, and I'd let him arm wrestle with me, and he'd put, fellas, both hands. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. He'd put both hands right there, and we'd arm wrestle, and he'd push my hand down, and I'd say, you strong, pumpkin. He'd say, you let me win, Daddy. I said, get grown, boy. I got plans for you. And fellas, before I knew it, my boy was grown. And all the times I could have been fishing with him, all the times, fellas, I could have just, I was out working 2 jobs trying to pay the bills. And you fellas and ladies know what I'm talking about. I guess what I want to tell you tonight is, folks, that the greatest heartache that you will ever know is when your children break your heart. When that little darling that was that long that you used to pin diapers on, when they grow up and you look around and before you know it, they do something that all of the love that mother and dad can muster won't change it, then you'll understand what heartache is about. Young people, especially college age, please listen. At Mississippi State University last year, we had 7 college freshmen killed the first 6 weeks of school. All of them in alcohol-related accidents, 4 in one. Because they were burned, twisted, broken, but because every one of them had false identification. Why? So they could drink earlier. I walked out of the office about 2 days after this had happened. The funerals were all over, and I started down the pavement, and there was an automobile pulled in. I looked at the tag, and it was started down the side of the walk, and this man got out, and he came. He said, "Excuse me, trooper, excuse me." He said, "I'm looking for Pete Collins. Do you know where I can find him?" And I said, I'm Pete Collins. He said, and he introduced himself, and he said, "My boy was in that wreck that you worked the other night, and we just wanted to come down and thank you." And he said, "Mama and I wished you'd take us out to where he lost his life." And I looked at him, and he was a physician, and I said, "Doctor, you don't want to do that." He said, "Yes, we do." He had 3 girls, and the only boy he had was killed, and the 3 girls were in the car, and we all climbed in my patrol car, and we started, and I just wanted to die. Fellas, I started around a curve, and he said, "Trooper, when we get close, you tell us when we're getting close." I said, "All right," and I looked at him, and I said, "Dr. Brown, it's right around this corner." And he reached over the back seat, fellas, you know what I'm talking about, and he took his wife by her hand, and they just looked ahead, and I pulled over on the side of the road, and they left the pavement. We figured our accident reconstruction, and it shot them in the air, and the next thing they hit was a telephone pole 18 feet 6 inches in the air, and they started flipping. And he reached back and he said, "My God, give us strength." We got out and he helped his family out, and he said, girls, y'all watch the traffic. And we walked across, had to go through a barbed wire fence. We pulled the strands apart as the girls went through, and we walked down the pasture that was now just... And he said, would you excuse us a moment, trooper? And I said, yes, sir. I backed over, now don't lose me, folks. I backed over to this fence, and I looked at a man and his wife and his 3 girls, and I watched them come together. They had a moment of prayer. And you know what he did, fellas? He took every one of those girls, he put his hands around their face. And he said, baby, promise, Daddy, y'all won't do this. Promise that you won't do this. Listen, my son lies in bed at night and he dreams of ways to run me crazy. And I want you to know, mamas, he got it from his mama. You see, there's only been 2 perfect people that ever lived on earth. That was Christ our Savior and my wife's mama. My wife's mother's never made a mistake, and she constantly tells me where her precious daughter would have been if it hadn't been for me. Folks, I want you to know that I pray every day for Jeff Collins. I say, God, he knows right from wrong, but I can't follow him every minute. And all folks, I looked out at him and I didn't know what to say. Finally, everybody sat down and they looked at me to say something, and it was like I forgot everyone else was there. And I said, Jeff, I held up the plaque. I said, son, Daddy'd give it all if you were 6 years old again. Do you listen to me, young people? Mamas and dads, grandmamas, granddaddies, listen to what I'm fixing to read you. In the 16th chapter of Matthew, I'm not a preacher, I'm just a trooper, but it said, for what is a man profited if he gained the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? A lady called me one afternoon and she said, Mr. Collins, can you come by my house the 13th? I said, ma'am, I'm coming in from Cincinnati that night, and I just won't. She said, it won't matter how late. Could you come by? I said, yes, ma'am, I will. I caught that Delta flight out of Cincinnati and landed in Jackson at 7:30. I drove up to a little old country white framed house, and the lights were on, and I walked up and she opened the door. We sat down and she brought some coffee and cake out, and finally she reached over on the counter and she said, do you remember Pam, don't you? And I said, yes, ma'am. She said she would have been 18 today. Yes, ma'am. She said, do you know what happened? I said, yes, ma'am, I was at the wreck. She said, oh, I know you know what happened at the wreck, Mr. Collins, but do you know what happened after? I said, I don't know if I do or not, ma'am. She said, you know, we watched our only daughter graduate from high school, and she walked across that stage and took her diploma. My husband and I kissed her goodnight, and she went out for the all-night party. We're sitting here when the phone rang, and it was the police department. They said, you need to come down to the hospital, that Pam's been in an accident. She said, Mr. Collins, we jumped in that little green station, and there was a little old state trooper standing there with a bottle of whiskey. And he said, what happened? He said, your daughter was drinking and driving. He said, that's a lie. My daughter doesn't drink, and she's not old enough to buy whiskey. He said, well, sir, here's the blood test, and here's the bottle. A few moments later, the doctor came out of the swinging doors and looked at him and said, Fred, I tried everything I could. Pam's dead. You find a man that sold my baby girl a bottle of whiskey, and I'll kill him with my bare hands. She said, honey, you don't mean that. He said, yes, I do. She said, we came home and sat down, and our preacher came over and prayed with us, and our church people, and finally, one by one, everybody started to leave. But my husband couldn't sleep, and so he started walking the floor, and he went into the kitchen to get him a drink. and he opened the cabinet and he found a note pen, said, "Dear Dad, I'm a woman tonight. I hope you don't mind if I borrow a bottle of your..." I've been a trooper for 18 years, and I walked up on 169 doors in my career. I know just how to stand. I know just what to say. These ears have listened to enough of you ladies scream until my job's not fun to me anymore. I've watched enough of you ladies twist the buttons off of my shirt. Fellas, I've watched enough of you pound your fist against the wall and ask me why until my job's not fun anymore. Where's the problem? Folks, listen to me. Every dream that I have in the world, every prayer that I pray, folks, is 1,000 miles over those pine-covered hills. Now, he's not worth 15 cents to you, but he's my world. He's what his mom and daddy work for every day. He's what I put money up to try to send him to school on. He's everything to me. To give you a good example, preacher, I might could walk up to you and slap you down, and you might be the Christian that'd stand there and take it. But our best breath you breathe. Why? Because you would, and you would, and you would. Because, folks, that's our world. That's all they are. They're our world. Listen, we don't see what other folks sees in them. They're just ours. My boy came in about 6 months ago, and he woke me up, scared me to death. He said, "Daddy, Daddy." I said, "What?" So he said, "Just don't wake Mama up. Come here." I said, "What is it? Come here." I got up and we walked in his room and he closed the door. And I knew his serious end. He said, "Daddy, do you love me?" I said, "You know I love you, son." And when he was a little fella, he'd say, "How much?" And I'd say, "This much." And he stood there with tears in his eyes and he said, "Daddy, do you still love me this much?" And I said, "You know I love you, son." He said, "I know you do, Daddy, but I just want you to tell me tonight that you love me." And I mean, I'm feeling stuff, and he just made me feel good. He took his arms and he put it around my neck and he locked his wrist. And I said, "Wait a minute. What have you done?" He said, "Don't ruin this, Daddy. This is a beautiful moment." I said, "You don't start that, boy. You just like your mama. You're never nice to me unless you want something." He said, "Daddy, I just want to tell you that I love you. Shoot you where you stand." What I'm telling you is, folks, 169 people I've knocked on their doors. But the greatest heartache of my life, I don't know what I'd do if someone walked up to my house and told me Jeff Collins was never going to come back. You do all the things and we think that they wear their hair long or they do this or whatever. But folks, listen, when's the last time that you looked at your child with love and said, "Honey, Mama just loves you. I just love you. Son, I know you're big and ain't manly, but Daddy wants to hug you. I love you, son." My son still loves his daddy's neck. Every time he goes somewhere, I love him. I kiss him. Why? Because, folks, I went to Talladega, Alabama one afternoon. I spoke in a high school, left from there, went away, and they called me about a year and a half later and said, "Want you to come back and speak at our prayer breakfast." I said, "I'm booked up. I'm going to be in Washington that night before, and I got to be a trooper at 12 o'clock the next day." They said, "Pete, if you'll catch that Delta flight into Birmingham, we'll pick you up, and you can speak at our prayer breakfast, and we'll have a private jet to take you back to Jackson. You'll be there in time." How you going to sell folks no? A man picked me up. I didn't know him. He introduced himself, said, "My name's Jack Cooley. I'm State Farm Insurance Agent." "How you doing, Mr. Cooley?" Started down the interstate, and he just pulled his van over, and he just boo-hooed. I mean, he just broke down crying. And I said, Mr. Cooley, you all right? What's wrong with you? And he looked over at me, and he reached and pulled me. He said, you spoke in my son's high school last year. And I said, yes, sir, I spoke over at Talladega. He said, my boy was a junior then, and he came home that afternoon. I had 3 clients in my office. Said he walked in, knocked on the door, and said, I want to talk to you, Daddy. And he said, son, I'm busy. He said, Daddy, I want to talk to you now. He said, Rafe, Daddy's busy, and I told you not to mess with me when I'm busy. He said, Daddy, I want to talk to you now. He excused himself from the men. He walked out, and his son said, Daddy, I know you love me. I know you do. You give me things. But, Daddy, you've never told me you love me. And he said, I put my arms around him and said, son, we'll talk about this tonight. He said, no, Daddy, I want to talk about it now. He said, I love you, son. He said, I can't tell you, Pete, when I said it, I just wanted to hold him, and I wanted to tell him forever I loved him. He said 3 weeks later, we went on a mission trip. Our church was building a church in Indiana, and said we spent a whole week on top of a church nailing shingle, just me and my boy. He said, Pete, 3 weeks after we came home, my son was killed in an automobile accident. And he said, if you hadn't spoke at our high school, I'd have never had a chance to look at my boy and say, son, Daddy loves you. You see, folks, there's more to just bringing a child into the world and giving them a place to live. God, they need somebody to love them. They need somebody to be there. I've had people say, my boy gets in jail, he'll just rot there. Mine, well, son, you've done wrong and you'll have to correct it, but your daddy's going to be there. We had a church over close to home. The man was having financial problems. He was a church treasurer. He'd had a drinking problems year before, and God saved him, and he went on the way, and he started having family problems and business problems, and he started drinking, and he got up in church, and he told him, he said, folks, I'm going to resign. As your treasurer, he said, I'm drinking, and I don't feel like it's right. And he checked into a dry out clinic in Birmingham, Alabama. You know what the church did to him? Been faithful to that church for 18 years. You know what the church did to him? Folks, they chartered Greyhound buses. Are you listening to me? They chartered Greyhound buses, and they drove over there, and they visited him, and they said, you get well and come home. We love you, boy. You hear me? Folks, I don't need you when I'm up. I need you when I'm down. I need you when I got problems. I need you when I'm hurting. These kids need you when they have problems, when they have boyfriend problems, girlfriend problems. That's when they need you, mamas and daddies. Don't pat them on the back when they have perfect attendance in Sunday school and then fuss at them when their grades are bad. Find out what you're doing wrong to maybe making their grades be different. Y'all didn't expect that. Maybe it wasn't what you wanted, but I tell you what, folks. I'm learning a lot, crying out for somebody to love them. My time's gone, and I know you folks are going to run me off, but I got to tell you this. If it burst every dog in the state of Georgia, I got to tell you. And what y'all going to do? Never let me come back? You can blame him. He met me on an airplane. I was patrolling 3 Christmases ago down a little old place. If any of you heard of the movie Mississippi Burning, it was down toward Philadelphia, Mississippi. And I trust that you don't judge the state of Mississippi by that movie. A little old boy about this tall. He was pushing a bicycle. The front tire was flat, and he was pushing that bicycle down the highway. It was cold, and folks, he had on a little old pair of cut-off blue jeans. Little t-shirt didn't even cover his navel. And I thought to myself, God, what's a little old fella like that doing way off out here in these woods by himself? And when I pulled over on the side of the road, you'd have thought he looked at a monster. His little old eyes were this big around. You want to get me in a wad, you let me hear you in a grocery store say, you better be good or I'll get that state trooper to lock you up. See, you teach them from day one to be afraid of this uniform. And I walked across that highway, and that little old fella looked up at me, and he was a-shaking all over. And I looked down at him, and I put my hands on my knees, and I said, Sonny boy, what you doing way off out here in these woods by yourself? He had a speech impediment, but he looked up at me like he was 50 years old. He said, I'm was running away. I said, you running away? He said, yes. And I ain't never gonna come back. I said, Sonny boy, where are you going? And fellas, he looked up at those big old pine trees blowing in the night air, and I guess he realized where he was. He said, me don't know. And I got down on my knees where I could look at him in the eye, and I said, Pumpkin, why you want to run away? Listen to me. Big old tears swelled up in his eyes, and they started dripping off of his chin. And that little old bottom lip started quivering. And he said, cause nobody loved me. I said, come here, Pumpkin. I love you. I took him in my arms and I held him, and he just shivered all over, and it was cold, and I just held him, and he looked up at me and he said, I wish I could live with you. And he said, but I can't. And I said, why can't you, Sonny boy? He said, 'cause I'm black and you couldn't love me. I held him in my arms, and you know what he didn't feel like a little black boy, a little white boy. You know what he felt like? A widow boy. That all in the world he wanted was somebody to love him. I found out, folks, that his people would leave him for a day at a time without something to eat, and then he'd mistreat him, and they'd spend every nickel they had on something to drink and just leave him for some. No wonder the little kid wanted to run away. And folks, we got some people that's not little kids that's still wanting to run away. They're out here on these streets and in somebody's hotel room or somebody's apartment that no one ever knocks and says, hey, I love you. No strings attached. I just love you. Let me tell you this, and then I'll leave you tonight. No, I don't believe in accidents. I believe with all of my heart, preacher, that God had a reason for me and you to meet on that airplane. If it wasn't for anything else but me. But folks, there may be someone here tonight. Dads, maybe there's something just not right. Maybe you've had some problems. Maybe you have a need in your home. You ever just walked down here with your wife and maybe walked over to your kids and said, y'all come pray with Daddy? Let's pray together. I got a need. You know, Dad's a big breadwinner. Mama's a breadwinner. Man, we just hero. When you ever asked your kids, come help Daddy pray? Daddy needs you to pray. Mama, hey, when's the last time your girl walked in and said, Mama, I want to talk to you about life? And you've had time to talk to her. Folks, listen, somebody's going to talk to your kids, and they may not be the ones you want them to talk to. Come on, church. When's the last time you as a church said, I want to love our kids? I want to love our family. And folks, listen to me. You'll never see Pete Collins again. But grandmamas and granddaddies, God bless you. Because if it wasn't for a lot of grandmamas and granddaddies, there'd be a lot of kids that wouldn't know whether or not they had anybody to love them at all. But as I look at you and walk off of this podium, I want to beg you. And if please is begging, I'll beg you. Don't wait until it's too late. I wished I had about a week with you, but you'd run me off. I got so much I want to tell you. But listen to me. My wife has a unique occupation. She's a funeral director. She don't laugh, she doesn't get any complaints. But she said the greatest heartache of her job is to see people stand at a casket and say, I wished I could do something over it. I wished I could tell you I loved you again. I wished I could do. Listen, folks, if you love me, you tell me tonight. I don't want you to send flowers when somebody blows me away on the highway. You tell me you love me while I can see it. If you love your pastor, you tell him you love him. If you love his wife, you tell her you love. Listen, if you love these kids, Dad, you walk over and say, God gave you to me, and son, I still love you, and I'm going to love you. I'm going to love you. Unconditional love. But please do this for me as I look out. It's from your area. I don't know if any of you know Sergeant Sam Connolly with the Missouri Highway Patrol. But ladies and gentlemen, Sam Connolly is a Christian man. And every one of those individuals that wears a badge needs your prayer. I came to your city many years ago and was over here in the Howard Johnson, and Sam came to my hotel room, and we sat down and prayed a while and prayed a while and cried a while and just had a wonderful visit praying for him. And then don't say you will if you don't. You do what you say you'll do. But your pastor's fixing to come, and he's going to talk to you a moment. But if God is speaking to you tonight, don't let this invitation time pass you away. Maybe you need to come and say, preacher, I hadn't been the family leader I need to be, and I want to be better. Mom, you might want to come and just simply kneel and talk to the Lord. That's your business. But all I'm asking you to do, if God has touched your heart, you lead, and others will follow. Preach at your service.
But if you can watch that without being stirred, something's wrong. When I watched that the first time, I tell you what, God got a hold of me about the kind of dad that I am. You know, do my kids know, do my boys know that their daddy loves them? And I'm so thankful to be a part of a church that loves our children. I'm thankful for Sunday school teachers like Sandy and Becky and all the others. I'm thankful for Matt and Amy for the ministry that they have to our teenagers. I'm thankful for all of you who love on these little kids that come in here. I'm thankful for a pastor that loves kids. But moms, dads, grandma, grandpa, we need to love them too. We need to love our own. And boy, little neighbor girl that doesn't have a mom and daddy that love them, we encourage you to bring them to church. Love on them. Bring them here because we love them too. And I thank you all for being here. And I hope you've been challenged. You know, I hope you've been encouraged. I know that I have. And again, I thank you all for being here tonight and for being patient. We took a little longer than what we might normally do on a Sunday night. But I think it was worth it, don't you all? So, and I thank Larry and Sandy for, they're the ones that introduced me to this video and to put it out for everyone online to watch it as well. Timeless message. It doesn't matter that it's, 30-some years old and a little grainy. The truth is the truth no matter how old it is. And so as we leave this place tonight, I encourage you, moms and dads, grandparents, hug your kids, hold them tight tonight. Pray with them when you put them to bed. And as we send them off to school this week, a lot of our schools, I think Skyline and Buffalo both start this week. Let's love our kids, and make sure they know it. Make sure they hear it. And I encourage you, bring them to church. Bring those nieces and nephews, those neighbor kids. Bring them to church. I would love to see one whole section filled up, with kids, that you all bring from your neighborhoods. Thank you all for being here. Continue to keep Pastor Bob in your prayers, that God will give him comfort and healing for that pain. Just seeing him come in this morning, and you could just see on his face how much pain he was in. So keep him in your prayers, and all the others on our prayer list. Thank you all for being here. Let's go to the Lord in prayer as we dismiss. Dear God, I love you so much, and I want to love you more because you first loved me. And help me, God, to love my children. Help us all, Lord, to love our children with the same kind of love that you love us with. And I thank you for Lieutenant Pete Collins and the message that he brought all those years ago that still resounds even today, even tonight. And God, I pray that you'd help each of us, Lord, to love those children that you've given us, to share the gospel with them. And God, I pray that you'd bless our church, bless our children's ministries. Lord, I thank you for all the folks who are so involved, Lord, for all the individuals that give of their time, Becky and Sandy and Shauna and Matt and Amy and all the others, Lord, so many. God, I thank you, Lord, but that our hearts would continue to be broken for the lost children and teenagers in our community. Lord, may we never forget those, Lord, that may not hear those words, I love you. They may not have those warm hugs and that safe home. God, I pray that you would help us to reach out to those children and that we would love them, that we would show them your love. Go with us now as we leave this place, God. Keep us safe as we travel home on the highways and to love you in the midst of our children, Lord. May they see you through us. Bless Pastor Baker. Heal him and raise him back up, Lord. We love you and thank you for all these things. For it's in your precious name we pray.